James, it's all on you, my friend.
Good morning, all. Welcome. Just give us another moment or two to let the last stragglers sign in, and we'll start in just about a minute.
Here's a question. What does a straggler actually look like? What pops into your head from an organisational psychiatrist perspective? What is the image that pervades your mind when you hear the word straggler? I think of a long, lean, skinny, lanky hobo type person. Now, this is obviously an inner reflection of myself. Although I used to be lean, now just
I think of someone
a
in
full
tattered
ton.
clothing as well. Yeah.
Really? You think of tattered
Something,
clothes?
yeah, tattered
So does
clothing.
that mean we have a natural emotional bias against a straggler? We see them
I don't
as
know.
negative.
Anil, what's a straggler in your vision?
Most likely a stranger.
Stranger. Ben
Stranger.
Warren, he's going to have a very legal interpretation of this straggler. Comes back to case law of Smith versus Jones in 1734 in England.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, it's not that exciting. It's just very literal. A straggler, I can't think of anything other than somebody who's fallen behind.
Oh, okay. Well, you're ex-army though, aren't you? Right. So
Yeah, yeah.
stragglers wouldn't have been allowed, would you? And that would have.
No, well, they either got beaten up or carted away on a stretcher.
Fun.
All right.
Not fun. Just waiting for
Shall we
Steve,
make a
folks.
start?
Well, I think we can get on, and I think, we can absolutely hit Sadiq with the toughest of questions by referring to something
Shows
someone's
up.
already
That's
said.
right. All right, good. All right, welcome everybody. We're here today to do part two of our three-part webinar series for 2025. Last time we discussed some of the many reasons why cyber criminals are targeting our homes, for example, because of our reduced technical security and our typically poor cyber hygiene behaviors, like using multiple passwords or using single passwords on multiple sites, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we're just more vulnerable at home. And unfortunately, cyber criminals know this, and they're now using these vulnerabilities in the home environment to gather credentials and in other ways to attack our work environment. So today we'll be discussing this and the implications of all of this for ourselves, for our organizations, and of course, what we should do about it. Obviously, very hot topics. We've got over 80 people registered for this. So tiny housekeeping. Please, audience, feel free to contribute questions via the Q&A at the bottom. We will try and monitor those as they come in and integrate them into the conversation as appropriate. So quickly, let me introduce myself and the panelists. We're having some technical difficulties with Sadid, who is a seasoned security leader with over 20 years of experience. So you might see Sadid jump in. He's currently the CISO at SEQ Water. We have Anil Yelamati, who's got a broad and diverse background in information security and cyber risk management. Anil most recently served as head of cybersecurity and risk at Blackmore's Group. Previously, he was at Westpac and Cyber CX. You'll also see Ben Warren, who is a director and principal at Ellum Warren Napa Lawyers, a firm based in Brisbane. Ben brings over 20 years of experience managing a wide range of commercial litigation and dispute resolution to our conversation here today. And my business partner, Brian Hay. Very few people in Australia, or the world for that matter, know more about cybercrime, cyber criminals, and cybersecurity than Brian. After working for 35 years as detective superintendent at the Queensland Police Service, he worked with Dimension Data, then Unisys, then started cultural cybersecurity with me almost a decade ago. Almost a decade ago. My name is James Carlopio. I'll be your moderator for this and the next session. I came to Australia 26 years ago for 6 months. That's why I've got this strange American accent. And my background is all in psychology and organizational consulting. So let's get into it. Given the shift of cybercrime toward the home, today we're going to discuss the implications of this for us and our organization. So Brian, I'm going to start out with you. The obvious first question for me is, please give us an example or two of how cyber criminals are actually using our homes, home environments, families to get into our workplaces.
Yeah, thank you, James, and thank you for the lovely introduction to everyone. And thank you, everyone, for giving up your time today. Look, I can give you a couple of examples because it's going to come at us in different ways. I mean, very recently, we have been seeing a trend of criminals targeting um, the new hires in finance teams of different organisations. They're doing their research. They're finding out their private email details. Then they're then approaching them on their private email, purporting to be their boss or their line manager, the boss's boss, say, for example, the CFO, purporting to be the CFO, communicating to them after hours, ideally on weekends, making requests of them to purchase goods or approve payments and the like. So that's a trend at the moment. It's not just one-off. We're seeing it in many of our client environments that staff are being approached in their private emails and communications, not the work system, but purporting to be from the work environment, getting them to transact on their behalf.
It's a scary example. All right, next question, Ben. Is the home now part of the organizational workplace? We know it's physically not part of the workplace, but is it legally? And obviously you can touch on moral or ethics as well, but is it part of the workplace from a cultural cybersecurity perspective?
Yeah, well, from any perspective, if you permit your employees to work from home, then the home has become a workplace. And that's undeniable in Australian law. There's been quite a few cases relevant to this, but just to show perhaps how extreme it is, I'll give a few examples. As far back as in 2011, there was a case where a lady was working from home and she fell down her own home stairs, and that was an injury that she could recover compensation for under workplace health and safety legislation. Similarly, more recently, there was a case where a woman was working from home, had a puppy, a dog, her own dog, in her own house, and to concentrate on work and to keep it from sort of hovering around her feet and I don't know, biting her shoes or something. She put up a dog gate, and then she was hopping over that dog gate and hurt herself. And the employer didn't even know that she had a dog, never mind a dog gate, or that it was a trip hazard risk. But nevertheless, that was a compensable injury under work legislation. And then there's even been a case where husband and wife during COVID, actually, there might have been de factos, were working from home. And during COVID, I don't know, whether, they just were spending too much time together or not. But basically, a woman was a victim of domestic violence by her own partner in her own home, but because the home was also a work environment, she could get compensation as a worker, as a workplace risk. So yes, it's the short answer to your question.
Obvious, right. All right, great. Thank you. So we haven't seen the link yet between cybersecurity and home as clearly as occupational health and safety, but the link's been made.
Yeah,
So
yeah, not that I'm aware of specific to cybersecurity, but yeah.
good. All right. Thank you. Neil, so look, obviously, now the home workplace and the office workplaces are linked, and organizations are responsible for occupational health and safety. We assume they're responsible for cybersecurity now as well. So efforts need to be the same in both places. My impression is very few organizations are doing this. What's your experience? Are some doing it, some not? If so, how?
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with Ben on this one. The home is absolutely the part of the workplace. Any device or network, in fact, connect to this home, or it should be considered as another digital perimeter, whatever we call as a perimeter in normal sense, like a firewalls and others. But now the attack surface has been increased. So organizations must consider the home devices and home network as their next attack surface.
Thank you. Brian, so look, another obvious question for me is if organizations are responsible for both the home and office, what can they be doing? What should we be doing in the home? Just open it up there. We'll hear from Brian, and then we'll see a legal perspective from Ben, and then Anil, in your experience. Brian, what should people be doing? What should organizations be doing about this?
Yeah, look, it's a grey area at the moment. I can see two sides of this argument. I think Sadita's just joined us via that phone connection at the moment. I'm sure he's going to have an opinion on this. And I think because it's not firm in law and it's not indoctrinated yet around the cybersecurity issue, I don't know that it's a very, and Ben no doubt will have an opinion. I don't know that it's a long boat at all, that they are connected irrespective. If you're connected digitally, it is your home environment. How is it not to be considered part of the organisation's responsibility to ensure that you are cyber safe in your home, working on your work computers and doing that sort of doing what needs to be done? Therefore, does the organisation need to secure, very simply, say the VPN connection to your device that you are working at home back to the organisational network? Or, because of the example I gave before, is there now a growing responsibility to defend the family or the home from personal attacks? When I say personal attacks upon their personal systems in order to defeat the organizational network. And to me, I think that is an issue that needs to be explored during this conversation. Now, Sadi, do you have opinion on that, if you can hear me?
Are you on?
Hey, Brian. Hey, everyone. Yes, I can hear you. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes,
yep,
great.
mate, we can.
All right. Hey, good morning, everyone. Yeah, definitely, from my perspective, there has been an increased crossover of cyber safety with work health and safety. And obviously that goes beyond just the perimeter of your own, the work environment. So how does that eventuate when you're at the workplace? And what does it mean when you're working in an increasingly hybrid sort of work arrangements remotely? I think those obligations that the corporate has, the boundaries are starting to blur. And, we are, I remember, in COVID days when we started the increased working from home, there was, when you're working remotely, these are your work health and safety requirements. We haven't been doing that from a cyber safety aspect. I think the conversation now needs to turn is, since cyber safety and work health and safety are so closely aligned, and as the digitization increases, as the organization rely more on technology, any mishaps in technology, i.e. a cyber disaster or cyber scenario, will have direct implication on work health and safety. How do we increase our cyber resilience beyond just our boundaries? I think that's the conversation that is starting to have at a certain extent, but is it getting the right direction? I think that's something that we as cybersecurity leaders need to put a bit more focus on.
Good, not so sure. Look, first thing that comes to my mind is, are we eventually going to have IT people from the organization visiting every employee's home? Is that reasonable? Is that inevitable? That just seems outrageous to me. Anybody?
Yeah, I'll probably start. I don't think so. I don't think that's a reasonable expectation, or we should be expecting that at all. I think we should be thinking from we are coming from very low level of maturity from that perspective. What steps can we take in the right direction to increase the cyber awareness of not only our staff members within the work environment, but when they're working remotely, when they're in whether they are working from their homes or whether they are working from any other offsite location? How do we make them aware? It can form, there are various strategies that you can think of. And obviously, having an IT technician visit their homes cannot be one of them. It could be like, giving them access to some basic training outside of their workplace that is not only available to them, but also to their extended families that are resident in the same family, same place. I think we had a similar sort of in my one of previous workplaces. We ran a cyber awareness campaign where we particularly honed in on, cyber safe at home, safe at work, and that resonated really well with the staff members and their families. It was, there were some campaign materials that were targeted at kids, at teenagers, and that really resonated well. I remember, like, my kids really understanding it and even taking it back to their schools. I think we're talking about just having the right conversations and having the right ideas, and then making sure that the ecosystem around the families is then built. And I think it goes just beyond your own workplace, your own environment. It's just, starting to have the ripple effect, and people having the right conversation, asking the right questions, and then schools and the sporting system around that needs to be built appropriately as well.
Makes sense. Ben, look, I'm going to argue, if I'm running an organization and you're my counsel, and I'm now responsible to pay when people trip over their dog fence, I'm actually not okay with that. I think I need to have someone from legal or IT visit every employee, because I need to make sure their workplace is safe, because I don't want to be sued and I don't want to be paid out. Are we going that way?
Look, I mean, everybody has different tolerances for risk. Um, One useful guide in this place is, I'm not sure if everybody can access the webinar chat, but I did put, um, coming at it not specifically from a cyber perspective, but more from a general health and safety perspective in working from home. There is in the chat thread a link to www.safeworkaustralia.gov.au, working at home checklist. That is the official sort of federal government working from home checklist. Given that it was issued by the federal government and the states have substantially endorsed it, it's a good checklist of things to be thinking about. And typically, as I understand it, the way the government itself, with its own working from home employees, have approached this is that they will give their employee the checklist and expect them to work their way through it and to fill it in themselves. So it doesn't require, I'm not saying it doesn't, but at least as far as the government itself is concerned, it's not sending a separate person out to each employee's workplace to double check. What it's doing is it's expecting the working from home employee themselves to fill in that checklist and to certify that it's being filled in accurately and correctly, and it identifies, therefore, the risks in that home workplace.
All right. So the organization takes responsibility for creating the checklist and then assumes the employee's reasonable behavior to fulfill and comply with that. Good. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, isn't it? There's nothing specific in my quick scan of that. And thank you for sharing that. There's nothing specific around cyber. However, there is something around called psychosocial hazards. And working from home will not create or increase the risk of harmful behaviors. For example, bullying or harassment may occur online, or a risk of family domestic violence. So based on that talks about online, it talks about harassment from a psychosocial hazard. It certainly creates the linkage, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I suppose it's worth mentioning in this context is that there has been case law also about an organization's responsibility to manage cybersecurity. So this is a case that was the ASIC, Australian Securities Investments Commission, suing a financial advisory firm called RI Advice Group for its failures to comply with obligations said to arise under the Corporations Act. And in the judgment, so what had happened was that the financial advisory firm had been hacked, and it had other cybersecurity leaks, and they were known to the organization, but even though it had already happened inside that organization, they basically just didn't do anything or didn't do enough to protect against that risk. And then a bunch of their clients' information got stolen, and with the stolen information, one of those clients lost over $50,000 in a scam. And the judge said, as a result of its failure to have documentation and controls in respect of cybersecurity and cyber resilience in place that were adequate to manage risk in respect of cybersecurity and cyber resilience. And then they were fined and had to pay costs exceeding $750,000. So So you combine the fact that the law will recognize corporations have a cybersecurity obligation with the fact that they have a working from home, and we keep saying working from home, but it's any remote work. I mean, it doesn't have to
Right.
be
It's
specifically the
not
work.
in the office.
Yeah,
Exactly.
not in the office. So there's been other cases where traveling salespeople, for example, and were their cars safe? If they were driving their own personal vehicle, when was the last time that personal vehicle had been checked by the employer, personal vehicle checked by the employer as roadworthy and stuff like that. So you combine the safety aspect with the cybersecurity obligations, and yeah, you don't have to have a very active imagination to see what could
Absolutely.
happen next.
Fantastic, Ben. Thank you. Look, Ben, can you put whatever it is you were just referring to as a link in the Q&A? Because the only we as moderators or panelists can see the chat. The audience can only see the Q&A.
Yeah, no problem. I'll
All
shove
right,
it
great.
into
Thank
the
you.
chat.
So look, a couple of Q&A. Someone said that an organization they know of, obviously we don't have any evidence of this, it's what a participant said, is already considering having IT teams visit board members' homes to ensure their homes are secure because they are very important person, VIP targets. So that's fascinating. I'd love to hear more about that. And another comment, which is a question I wanted to bring up later, is talking about this inevitable link between cybersecurity, which used to be the purview of IT. If we're going in this direction, does it become the purview of HR or people in culture or whatever that's called in an organization? Anil, Sadid, Brian, any of you see this convergence of cybersecurity with HR and moving away from IT? That's a fascinating possibility.
I'll let Anil go first, then I'll go second.
Yeah, I don't think IT is very interrelated. I mean, like if someone need to work from home, IT is the first one where they come and knock the door for equipment. So I don't think it's going anywhere from the IT teams. But the only thing will go to HR is with respect to policies, I would say. So
Okay.
what are the different policies are changing when we are going to work from home or something. So I'll give you two important scenarios in the work from home, right? So organizations who allow people to log in from their personal devices without any any security controls. For example, you can log in like office.com and give you username and password, bam, you're inside the organization emails. What happens if that particular system gets compromised and the username and password gets stolen and put in dark web like info stealer, right? That's the biggest security risk. So that's the security control within the home environment, home devices, right? To enforce from the organizations. And I'll give you another example. Though you have a bulletproof security system, and I have seen, you don't really believe one of the ASX 200 the organization, when we did a audit, one of the network guy had a site-to-site VPN directly connected to his home. He had a firewall and he had a site-to-site VPN directly connected, and he can access anything in the office. And he has multiple systems in his network, even from his, for example, another system which is pre-configured used by his son or daughter, right? That they can directly connect to that particular company's system. So I mean, these are like a very important security controls which were forgotten right now, like in this home environment. This is absolutely, the home is absolutely the another attack surface, and also must be considered as a office extension.
Sajid, do you see anything in your area?
So I think what is important to understand is cybersecurity has evolved out of like it's beyond just a technology problem anymore. It is a business risk, and it needs to be dealt with as such. Obviously, different organizations will have different implications. I've already seen HR being a convergence with HR and the requirement and the need for cyber to be working closely with HR. To answer your question, whether cybersecurity, like from a structural perspective, that's what the discussion is, what's sitting under HR. Again, it would vary from organization to organization, but in the traditional sense, I do not see that happening. Having said that, I do see HR having a strong or closer influence and being a very close stakeholder. So I think, as I was alluding to before, the perimeter for the organization has moved. Homes would probably be seen as an extension of the corporate network, but at the end of the day, the cybersecurity risk usually would be introduced using technological means. It will have other implications, but how do you overcome those sort of challenges? How do you make sure that the security remains intact with those blurred boundaries between personal and the professional space? We have seen real threats originating or happening, starting from home or remotely, and then having implications or impacts on the corporate side. For example, take example for business email compromises would sometimes start from personal accounts and devices. I have heard firsthand instances where staff members have received direct emails on their personal devices that are supposedly coming from either their known entities on the supply chain or from their own work colleagues. How do they act? What sort of capabilities have we made available to them? And what sort of controls do we have? I think when we're talking about controls, that's where then it comes in. What controls do we have? There are technical controls, but then there are non-technical controls. And if we are looking at it from a HR angle, then that's where the focus is. And if primarily the focus is on the HR side, if it is on the people and control side, that's what's, then perhaps you might see that that playing a bit more stronger influence in that part of operating model. My leading thought for this particular topic is, at the end of the day, it will come down to your organization and what the operating model for that particular organization would suit, and how would you and looking at it from a risk appetite perspective, and looking at the risk exposure for the organization, and then what controls and what operating model would you have in place to deal and manage that appropriately, should then drive the conversation how we should manage that and how we should be structured.
Perfect. Makes sense. Brian, over to you.
Yeah, look, a couple of things from those great comments. It just reminded me of just another classic example. I know of a situation where a Gmail account from a person working with IT was compromised, which led to a massive scale of ransomware attack and terabytes upon terabytes of data being lost. So the fact that they're coming after us as individuals in our private connection is a given. It doesn't really matter where that attack takes place. And the answer of that is, I say no. But when we get back to the home, it's because the ancillary consequence of it brings our families and a very emotive issues, and we start talking about our children, into the equation. Again, another example, I think I shared this on the last one. CFO in Brisbane receives an email. Attached to the email is a photograph of his 5-year-old son with the threat, pay me $5,000 or I will ruin the online reputation of your child for the rest of their living years. We are now seeing private communications saying, I've compromised your computer. If you don't want me to share the images of your children and what you do to them, you better pay me money. So we are seeing more and more personal flavors and they're going up. What's the fundamentals of social engineering? It's about manipulation of human emotions. So what is the most emotive topics we can muster? Our families, our love, the ones dearest and nearest to us. There's no doubt in my mind, we will see recruitment of insider threats based on threats to the family. Make no mistake. So how do we advance and move the needle? By being proactive and getting ahead of the curve, building the resilience proactively before we sort of need it. I think it's a disgrace in this country. We still do not have a national curriculum to teach our children to be safe online. It is the mandate of individual schools and their headmasters to finalise the curriculum for what their kids teach. Now, some headmasters, some principals are doing a great job and they're battling that. But I can tell you, there's a big pushback from teachers to bring any more onto their agenda. And that's where I foresee a pushback from HR departments to say, hey, I don't want this IST on my place. I'm busy enough. I don't know this stuff. And we've got to understand, I think, that we're in a process which is constantly a dynamically changing environment. And we are on a journey of change and ideally continual improvement. And what we need is a little thing that sometimes is argued to be absent, is the thing called leadership. Are we going to react, or are we going to lead, be proactive, and start building resilience for tomorrow instead of just, well, let's wait till something happens, which tends to happen when you've got budgets to deal with and all that sort of. So do you want to be a leader? Do you want to be a change agent? Are you prepared and have the courage to make a mistake here and there? And hopefully not have you be headed for the privilege. But I think so, to me, it's except we're in a journey of evolution. And it's about whether you want to take the next step under your own volition, or you're going to wait for someone else to lead, then you follow. They're big statements, so I apologise. I don't want to offend anyone. But change is led. And why do we have to have the pain and see the horrible consequences of that? I mean, give you an example, and I'm not trying to be too alarmist here. I remember when I was a baggy bummed copper, and I was superintendent in charge of fraud and cybercrime at the time, but trying to get the organisation to listen to what I had to say, and I could see this sort of stuff coming. And I was saying, this is happening here, it's going to happen here, and people saying no, and it was very difficult to get traction. But then we had a series of different murders, and guess what? In those, what was the pivotal point that made the foundation of difference moving forward? It was digital evidence of people going online and preparing their murders, and it was that digital evidence that made the difference. So all of a sudden, what was perceived as digital voodoo actually had relevance to the real world because it related to other people. So I think Sadid called out organisational risk, Ben called out litigational consequences, and these are the things that are there, but it's just about bringing them together in a proactive sense where we make a vision, a perspective, and a change for tomorrow.
Yeah, perfect. Look, let's just take a breath. We're about halfway through. Look, audience, what I take away so far is think about what's really important to you. Think about your family members. Think about your interests and your hobbies, because these are the places where we're vulnerable. These are the emotional hooks. These are the way they're going to get us. So one of the takeaways so far is be forewarned, be forearmed. Make sure you know the things that are going to be sensitive, as it were, to you, and have your alarm bells go on when you get texts, when you get emails, if you get voice phone calls that sound a little dodgy. This is one of the great takeaways from the conversation, I think, so far. So look, let's go back, and I think it was Sadid who mentioned the differential risk profiles of different organizations. I'd like to explore that for a little while, if possible, because clearly, what a major bank needs and what a local pizza shop needs in terms of, cybersecurity on the technical side and cybersecurity on the people and education and cultural side are completely different. So have you noticed these different risk profiles? Does it matter? What about physical risk? Anything come to mind, Sadid, in this area? And then we'll hear from Ben, Brian, and Anil if you guys have any reactions to this.
I'll have a reaction.
Hey, James, yeah. All right.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Sadid.
Yeah. Thanks, James. Yes, definitely. I think risk profile and exposure, and what does, you always got to understand the risk profile, and your action and the investment in cybersecurity needs to be balanced in line with what the risk profile of your organization is and what is really at stake. Because at the end of the day, based on where you're coming from, you don't want to be over investing, and you should definitely not be under investing. and it's finding that sweet spot for your organization. Sometimes that's what becomes a bit of a challenge. Right. And that's where I appreciate where when Brian was talking about some of the areas of exposure, but again what does it mean for your organization, and we need to put things in perspective and into context for our organization, and then that needs to really inform what controls are then needed. For example, James, you spoke of a pizza shop again. What information is really at stake? Right. And looking at that, what investment and what controls could be appropriately apply that may uplift the security state of that particular organization may vary completely differently to an organization where physical security is of utmost importance, where customer data is really at stake, where the availability of information is also quite critical. That would be phenomenally different. And compared to and another organization where primarily the focus is on the availability of the systems. Yes, if the data exposure, if there is data exposure, then yes, that's a risk. But that's a risk we may be able to absorb. But downing of the system or downtime is something that is completely unbearable. And then those sort of conversation and those sort of answers will then drive the appropriate strategy that we need to put in place to make sure that our organization's overall security resilience is appropriately uplifted. But one thing I can tell you for sure is, regardless of what those risk profile is, what the underlying factor that I've seen is from the cultural the cybersecurity awareness side. That's a given. You got to make sure that your staff members are aware, and the security is being seen as everybody's responsibility, not only the IT team, the business team, or the security team's responsibility. And how do you part that message? How do you make sure that that responsibility is appropriately passed on, and each staff member understand what they need to be doing in any given scenario to make sure that the organization continues to remain protected and reasonably deal with cyber threats as they emerge, as they evolve.
Great, thank you, Ben. Is there a legal perspective on this, or your personal perspective?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's legal specific, but I mean, I've got a few examples of that I think help reinforce the point. Is that going back to John Howard, Prime Ministership, I think was that long ago. I think it was that long ago. I got a personal friend. We both went through law school together, who was a legal officer with the Navy, and they had a lawyer, and one of them was my friend, on each ship that was enforcing what was called the sovereign borders at the time, the sovereign borders campaign or program or whatever they called it. And she was required not to carry her smartphone, although it was a while ago, they did have smartphones. So everyone was carrying around, for example, I think at the time, I don't know, it might have been up to maybe iPhone 8 or iPhone 9, something like that. But she wasn't allowed to use that, and instead had to use a BlackBerry. She was one of the last people on earth to still be using a BlackBerry, because of the increased risk that was perceived to exist around, being on a naval ship and enforcing sovereign borders. There was similarly, I think, again, going back quite a long time, there was a large client that I had engaged in intense negotiations with the unions over an enterprise bargaining agreement. And two of the union fellows came into the CEO's office one day, and similar, it reminded me, Brian, with your 5-year-old son story, because he had this CEO had a 7-year-old daughter, and the union reps pushed across the desk a photo of like taken through a telephoto lens with like a superimposed target, sort of like a sniper's target sort of thing over his 7-year-old daughter, and he could tell from the date stamp and that, and the uniform, and how that it was probably taken that morning when she was on her way to school by the and not taken by his family. And it wasn't his computers that had been hacked and the image scraped off that. It was some union rep had had literally stalked the school. I guess this is spearfishing rather than fishing, if isn't it? If you've got either a big negotiation involving the unions or you're a financial services organization with a lot of client data, or you're a law firm. I know we've done. I know a while back when we were doing work with Adani, and there was a Stop Adani protest, sort of was at its height of intensity. There are a lot of major contractors, large organizations, including insurance companies, that due to the unwanted attention of various protesters, just wouldn't contract with Adani. One of the reasons they cited was that those who were contracting and were known to be contracting with Adani would have protesters outside their workplaces, and there were employees that would come into a workplace for, say, an earth moving business, and they'd get spat on or threatened by protesters. So, yeah, I mean, every organization's got to assess its risk based on these sorts of factors of, are we dealing with valuable client data, sensitive security, national security issues, financial services with significant access to money. Yeah, there's various ways to assess that risk.
Thank you. Brian, any comments?
Yeah, look, a couple of things. Thanks for sharing that. Been very sensitive, very moving, very disturbing. But it just heightens that the adversary we're dealing with will go to extraordinary lengths. They don't give a flying fig about anyone other than themselves in the pursuit of their criminal endeavors. And I think that's what it'll be. It's not about what the average person or the reasonable person would do. It's about understanding the criminal entities we're combating with, and they will stop at nothing, and they will seek ongoingly to take every leverage they can from every emotional vantage point. But I think in your question, James, there was a thing, do we have the pizza shop and say the corporate? And you say, well, the tech model may be different in the response to, and eloquently answered by Sadid around the data, for example. But to me, in respect of the human, it doesn't matter if you're in the work in the pizza shop or you're an employee in a corporate giant. And I'm going to forgive me from that. So, folks, it's not a sales pitch, but I'm very passionate about. We talk about cyber life skills, and what we lack in this country, and not just this country, we lack the fact that every one of our citizens does not possess the fundamental cyber life skills that they need to protect themselves and their family on a 24/7 basis. That they are in a position, they're prepared to repel the attacks that are occurring on a daily basis. We do not have them. The foundations of understanding what cybersecurity fundamentally is and how it can attack their daily lives, how to actually manage your passwords appropriately, how to build resilience against phishing threats, how to actually identify and then build resilience from social engineering threats. We don't have that. And I think that is one of the failings. And it's, yes, you can grade the risk around the data. That's no problem. But the risk around people, I think there are core elements that we have a lot to aspire to and a lot yet to achieve.
Great. No, absolutely. Neil, I'm going to ask you the next question. Look, you're right, Brian. We all have basic life skills. I often talk about, look, most people know how to cook toast. Many people know how to make rice, drive a car, count out change, or maybe we're losing that life skill. But Neil, in your experience, if there was a national curriculum, if there were a big government move or a particular organization said, I want to teach everybody and their families the basic core cyber life skills they need to stay safe in the year 2025 going forward, what are the first couple of things that come to your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Before going there, I would like to add one point in the risk profile thing. I'll give you
Please.
Similar kind of story like Ben. So in my past experience so what we have done, we have integrated one of the financial client third-party vendor risk assessment tool with the threat intelligence platform. That's a bit of a integration which was really good. And what they found in a couple of alerts was so financial regulations are very strict, but one of their vendor is offshore vendor and a development company, and one of their developer computer got compromised, and all their API keys are in a dark web, which they weren't really informed before, right? So when you compare with the risk profiles, the development company's risk profile is a lot lesser than the financial firm, risk. But when these guys are providing services to their financial client, they should be treated as one. Like, I mean, they are dealing with a more sensitive information, but they have absolutely no controls in their, home environment, or their working from home policies, nothing. So, yeah, I mean, when you have those risk profiles, very, I mean, identical, but they should enforce the similar security controls, when they're serving very highly financial motivate customers. And for your question, absolutely, if there is any regulation coming, I would strongly suggest the cyber awareness to be part of that particular curriculum, for sure.
All right, look, the next question from one of the attendees has to do with the risks of insider threats and the impact of personal life to work life. Reactions, Brian? What's going on with insider threats and all this?
It's really interesting. In the last report, I think, from the OAIC in Canberra, the Federal Privacy Commission of getting all the data from notifiable data breaches, I think it was 11% were known to be attributable. Of 11% of the data breaches reported were attributed to an insider threat. Now, an insider threat in Australia is different to an insider threat in the United States. In the United States, an insider threat is deemed a person who willingly or unwillingly, complicit or non-complicit, does something which results in the loss of data. In Australia, an insider threat is a person that willingly and takes action and is complicit in the loss of that data. So it's quite different. And to have 11% reported or declared as being an insider threat is significant. That's one in every, obviously, let's say 1 in 10. Now, that's what they know about. So what is the unknown influence they don't know about?
Right.
And I said before, I can see people being approached on the inside for the purposes of and have personal information used against them in order to be recruited or disclose intelligence or the like. And this isn't new. I remember investigations going on where crime gangs from overseas were recruiting people inside the bank, and they were getting paid $50 for every digital photograph they took of the digital signature and the account details off the screen. And that, I'm going back 15 years for that. It was a long time ago, so, or thereabouts. So insider threat is continuing to grow, and in the dark web, we're seeing more insider threat forums, and you can get some excellent reports now that really break down some of the posts. So what they're doing is they're recruiting the insiders from organizations, then they are renting them out to other criminals to leverage bad things, obviously. So it's becoming, the insider threat is becoming an industry, and as things get more competitive, as opportunities may through volume decrease or increase, we wait and see. I expect more leverage with highly emotive issues such as home and family to come out. Now, whoever made that comment, and I thank you for that, I don't think it is just about how can we improve the impact of insider threat apart from screening employees and contractors regularly. Can I just give it, I don't want to offend anyone again, but I can do it easily apparently, but I go back to some of the jobs I had to do. One of the, as a copper again, but I actually did a lot of corruption investigations. I got tagged as the corruption fighter in the QPS. So Fitzgerald inquiry, Carter and drugs and corruption inquiry, I got investigated for that. No one knows that. You won't find it in any organisational chart, but I used to do all the political investigations in the QPS, State Crime Command, blah, blah, blah. And I can assure you that no one joined the police academy with the intent to be corrupt. Okay? They did not go there to do bad things. I would like to think that everyone there with good intent, honourable conviction, wanting to make a difference for their community in a safe, stable job where they could serve the community's needs and interests. But as things evolve and everyone's life takes an individual path, there are people that fall victim, if you like, to the temptation of life and very aspects to it. And so it's not about, yes, you've got to have good screen employees and those sorts of things. But what becomes more important today, I think, is understanding your organizational culture, those that play, understanding the people you work with every day, and understanding what are some of the nuances, because we did a lot of studies into what drives corrupt behavior. And you always get, there's a feeling the job owes me something. They're often charismatic people that work independently. They don't want to work with everybody. There's often a need for money or a dependency or drugs or gambling. And there is a resentment to other entities. And always, and this sounds funny, right? But one of the things we used to see for internal frauds a lot was an addiction to poker machines. So I always used to say to people, if you want to know who's a risk in your workplace, take the work unit out for lunch, go to a venue where there are poker machines, enjoy your meal. And if someone gets up and leaves the group to go and play poker machines, I said, there's a risk. I know it's bland, I'm not playing, but it's about knowing your people, right? And it's about knowing what they're doing and looking for the signs. It's not going to be black and white. It's going to be a myriad of shades of grey, but it's about having the skills and the knowledge to pull them together.
That's great. All right, look, we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to take a wrap around, starting with Ben, giving you warning, then Sadid, then Anil, then Brian. 30 seconds. This has all been hopefully interesting to people, but of course everybody wants to know, what should we do? How can we stay safe at home? How can we keep our organizations stay safe? 30 seconds. Ben, any ideas?
All right. Well, I'll do two things. One, basically instruct your IT people that whatever protections you have in place for your workplace modem, for example, our router, or other security systems, be thinking that they ought to be arranging the same sorts of protections for people who are working remotely or on remote devices, to the extent that's possible. The second point I'd make is workplaces should think about having a bring your own device, BYOD policy, so that if workers are using their own personal devices for work-related purposes, you know about that, you know what software they're using, those sorts of issues.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben.
I
Sadid.
suppose, sorry, can I just double click on
yeah.
the last part? Because I have had cases where employees who are in a position to have access to client databases or other things, they've left, and then it's become restraint of trade issues where they're poaching those clients. I mean, there's all sorts of benefits beyond the cybersecurity threat in having a BYOD policy that considers the informational risk. I suppose it goes to that insider issue as well. Absolutely. Is that sometimes your own people can turn into your worst nightmare after they stop being loyal to you.
That's it. We need to think about managing data and devices. Absolutely good advice, Ben. Thank you. Sadid, 30 seconds. What do you want to tell people to stay safe at home in organizations?
Look, with blurred boundaries between personal and professional, and with the evolving real threats, it is quite important that the organizations are taking the right steps. I think visibility into remote devices is very important, and making sure that reinforcing the point that cyber hygiene at home, making sure that staff are aware of their home security awareness and what are their best practices. It's appropriately disseminated. At the end of the day, the focus should be on shifting culture, not just tools. We need to make cyber personal. For example, if the home Wi-Fi gets hacked, it is no longer a family issue. it could potentially, lead to a company-specific wide breach or an incident that impacts the organization. So frame cyber resilience as part of the employee value proposition, especially, it has become very easy in this hybrid working model, and we just provide support to our staff with clear, respectful guidance, not just controls.
That's great. No, I firmly believe, yes, when you make it personal for people and relevant, all of a sudden, guess what? It becomes important to them. That's great, Sadid. Thank you. Anil, what are we going to do to help keep ourselves safe at home and in our organizations?
Yeah, see, as long as you have internet footprint, like a social or anywhere, like you have a LinkedIn account or you have a Facebook account or whatever you have as an internet footprint, you are traceable. And we have a tools everywhere like OSNet or threat intelligence tools where we can correlate work to personal to family. So there is a tremendous work done by a lot of good people as well as bad people, generating a lot of tools to correlate your work and personal. So I don't see any boundaries at this moment. So even if you are in a personal device accessing work or your work device accessing personal information, there's always a tool to correlate everything. So make sure treat your personal devices also as an attack surface. That's my final message.
Thank you. All right, Brian, over to you, and you can sign us off, buddy. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, James, and thanks to Ben and Neil and Steve for giving up a valuable time. Once again, James, you've done a brilliant job in hosting us today and keeping us on track, which was always difficult with Ben, because I've seen that man in action and he's just a wild man. He can get way off in tangents. Actually, I'm Ben. Of course, I'm talking about myself. Thank you for letting me use you and abuse you. Now, I would like to say, the question I have to people is, how do you know your current processes are working, that your awareness program is working? How are you measuring it? And the issue is that, you can measure it. And then you got to ask the questions, do you want to be the difference or make the difference? And because if you can measure it, then you got an insight to proportionately measuring your risk around those issues. And it's about being fair dinkum and being honest with it. But I would encourage everyone to think about, how do you improve and start to build a sustainable model around your people possessing the cyber life skills they need to protect themselves, their families, their communities, and of course your organization. So I just want to thank everyone, put it out there. Brilliant job. Thank you so much for your time. This is being recorded, and for all the registrations, they will receive a copy of this on probably later today. Everyone stay safe, have a fantastic week, and thank you, team, for doing a brilliant job. Ryan, you're the bone behind the scenes to all of these things that happen, so thank you, and we look forward to the next presentation, which arguably brings the first two episodes together, so watch this space. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.